Hello and welcome to Death is Whimsical Today. My name is Talasan, and this podcast takes a lighthearted look at strange and unusual events throughout history which have resulted in the death of at least one, if not multiple people, whether that be by nature, accident, or good old-fashioned murder. We're going to jump straight in with the 1858 Bradford sweet poisoning. Shockingly enough, the title of the fact kind of gives the plot away, but it's interesting to see how it came about. So the year is 1858, we're in Bradford, England. There's a fellow called William Hardiker, and he sells candy in the green market. So he has a little store there, he just sells a few different kinds of candy, but the main one he does is he sells humbugs. The humbug, if you don't know what it is, it's basically just a hard-boiled peppermint candy. They're very tiny, usually white and black, they can be red. They're not the most exciting candy in the world, but it's 19th century England. It's not like we have the plethora of treats that you have in any given supermarket store today. William Hardiker sells so many of these, he's actually known as Humbug Billy. Again, 19th century England, everybody gets a nickname, and that happens to be his. He doesn't actually make the humbugs though. He just sells them. He buys them from a fellow called Joseph Neal, and this turns out to be a problem for dear William Hardiker, because Joseph Neal, he has the very popular mindset that they had back in the day of, that ingredient is expensive, what could be a less expensive ingredient? For Joseph Neal, he looked at the price of sugar, saw it was 6 times the price of plaster of Paris, and was like, do you know what? I bet we could put plaster of Paris into the humbugs. And who would know? And Joseph Neal did have a point. 1, plaster of Paris is a much cheaper option than sugar. 2, there was no way for people to actually really test the ingredients that he was using. They just had the humbug and had to trust. It was incredibly common for people to do this because no scientist was going to swoop in and be like, I am the food superhero and I have tested your loaf of bread and it turns out your bread is actually 90% cat. Don't do that. Sell the people bread. Science was just starting to get into actually testing food and going, oh, turns out your meat pie is actually made of human flesh. Hello, Sweeney Todd. That's not great. We're going to need you to bring this shop up to code and use beef instead. No more people. Now, obviously, people weren't telling others what they were substituting in, no matter what you did. Whether you were Sweeney Todd and it was human flesh, or you were Joseph Neal and it was plaster of Paris. They would have little code words that they would use instead. Words like daff, molten flash, or my personal favorite, stuff. Because nothing in the world seems more suspicious than when you go, yes, my secret ingredient is stuff. So in Neal's mind, this is a practice that everyone is doing. He referred to his own secret ingredient as daff, and on the 30th of October 1858, he happened to be running low on it. So he sent his lodger James Archer to go to the pharmacy to pick up some more of this special super secret, totally sugar, just don't ask more about it ingredient. And that would have been 100% fine, except for the fact that the pharmacist, Charles Hodgson, was sick that day. He was in the pharmacy, but he was the kind of sick where he's like, I'm not serving customers, I'm here to play with my chemicals, that's it. Customers, you go to my assistant, William Goodard. So it was actually William Goodard who ends up serving James Archer on this day. William Goodard, being the assistant, in this case, he didn't actually know where everything was, so he had to go to Charles and go, hey, Charles, where do we keep the daff? Charles was like, it's up in the attic. I'm sick, just go. You can find it. It turns out William Goodard couldn't find it. You see, he's up there just looking for a white powder. Instead of finding this plaster of Paris, what he ends up finding is arsenic trioxide. He has found some white powder, so he scoops up 12 pounds of it, and he sells that to James Archer, who promptly goes back and hands the bag of arsenic over to Neal. Neal, apparently not wanting to make the sweets either today, hands it over to one of his experienced sweet makers, James Appleton. And James Appleton is just like, excellent, you've given me more daff, I can start doing my job, and he gets to it. Since the year is 1858, Appleton doesn't really have those pesky health and safety standards he needs to adhere to, so he's just cooking these humbugs with his hands ungloved, which means he's touching the arsenic. The arsenic's getting all over his skin and being absorbed. Appleton ended up getting very sick during making these, and for several days afterwards, he actually had pain in his hands and his arms and was vomiting. But just because he was feeling sick doesn't mean he stopped making the candy. He produced 40 pounds of the sweets. Joseph Neal took these and sold them to Humbug Billy. He had to sell them to Humbug Billy at a discount though, because they didn't look right. They came out looking weird, which will happen if you substitute arsenic for plaster of Paris. Despite the weird-looking candy, Humbug Billy did try one of the sweets, which ended up making him ill, but not before he was able to sell 5 pounds of it from his market store. 5 pounds may not sound like a lot, but humbugs are very, very tiny, so these can be dispersed quite far. A lot of people are able to get these. It's not too soon after he starts selling these candies that 2 people die, and at first they think it's cholera. But the bodies keep piling up. Within a day, 21 people have died and 200 have fallen severely ill, all of it now linked to arsenic poisoning. Obviously, they follow the trail back to the candy maker. When all of your victims seem to have humbugs, it becomes glaringly obvious what connects them together. Charles Hodgson, the head pharmacist, William Goddard, the pharmacy assistant, and Joseph Neal, the guy who owns the company making the candy, they all get arrested. Now, none of these charges end up sticking. The assistant and Joseph Neal, they get the charges actually just dropped, whereas the pharmacist ends up getting acquitted. So no one gets held accountable for all these people who are dead and very, very sick now, or the people who never want to eat a humbug again. But this event would be referenced when they were trying to pass 2 acts into law. The first is the 1868 Pharmacy Act. What this did was restrict who could sell drugs, and specifically poisons, by introducing a legal definition of who a pharmacist was. Before this, there hadn't been one. This allowed a lot more control over who could distribute this stuff. The other one was the 1875 The Sale of Food and Drugs Act. And this is a fantastic one, which should have come in much sooner than 1875, and it was basically about the idea that food and other provisions should be what people are stating it is. So if you go to buy a humbug, that should be made of sugar and not plaster of Paris, or, as in the worst case scenario here, arsenic. And with that, we've covered the 1858 Bradford sweet poisoning, which occurred because somebody wanted to save money by switching sugar out for a plaster of Paris, but accidentally switched arsenic in, delivering tainted humbugs to the people of Bradford. The total deaths were 21, the injuries 200, and the lead cause of this, arsenic poisoning, with the repercussions being no one held responsible. However, laws changing later on down the line. I hope you've enjoyed learning about this odd occurrence from history. If you have, let me know which candy you would pick to take you out via poison. For myself, it would be a Snickers bar. My aim is to bring out at least one interesting fact per week. The episodes will get longer. This one was particularly short as I'm just getting used to the whole podcasting, recording, editing process. The next one coming up will be the Lagos Armory explosion, which is a very interesting main cause of death. It's not what you would expect. Thank you so much for listening. I hope to assault your eardrums next time. Have an absolutely fantastic rest of your time zone wherever you are. Bye!